The interesting thing about Enrico Fermi was that we know him because he created the Fermi paradox. And the Fermi paradox becomes that moment in which Fermi says, if we have all these aliens, where are they?
Fermi asked, where are they? Now, my guest tonight is going to tell you that information has been locked in the Vatican archives since at least 1933 after the Magenta crash in Italy, and that those men guarding it aren't astronomers by accident. Stick around. I'm Rai, your Kodega, here to lead you through the shadows of the unknown. My journeys have carried me across hidden corners of the world to places steeped in wonder, whispers, and unanswered questions. Walk with me as we uncover ancient civilizations, unravel unexplained phenomena, and chase the legends that refuse to die. Welcome to Kodega's Codex of Curiosities. All right, everyone, if you're loving the show like most of you are, I want you to go check out my website. I now have an interactive map where you can go and check out the locations for many of the episodes. I've uploaded about an eighth of them. So go check them out. And while you're doing that, there's challenges as well. You can watch the show to earn experience points. You can like the show, share the show, comment on it. And every time you get more of these experience or wisdom points, as I'm calling them, you will actually level up. A little bit of a game in there. Go see how far you can level up. All right. And also, one last thing. On Saturdays, you can find me on the Cult Conspiracy. Go check out their show and see me with some episodes that maybe you've never heard on Saturdays. All right. Last time my guest was here, and we barely scratched the surface. And I told you, we're going to have him back. He's got a new book, and this one goes straight at the Vatican. Welcome back, Leo Zagami.
Thank you for having me back on. It's a pleasure to be back also because I have another book to discuss with you, which is also a book which I think is rather important for the moment in time we are living. Because we are subject to a lot of information at the moment pertaining this specific UFO, UAP disclosure, which is somehow though manipulated. And in fact, my book goes right there into describing who is really holding the strings, the real puppet masters of the situation. And on top of that, of course, I talk about my personal experience, but most of all, the book is made in collaboration with the Centro Ufologico Nazionale Italiano, which is an organization with 60 years of experience on the field. And it was important, like I said, just to give my readers the opportunity to get deeper into a subject which I mentioned in the past, but I didn't have the opportunity, of course, to discuss in depth like this time.
Oh, awesome. So, of course, your latest book is called The Vatican's Top Secret Alien Agenda, Hidden Encounters, Forbidden Rituals, and Jesuit Astronomers in the Age of UFO Disclosure. And everybody can find that, of course, on Amazon. I know you're pretty much a bestseller on there. So I want to jump right into it. You know, I looked into this, and in chapter 5, you talk about your own encounter of the third kind in Campo dei Fiori, in the square where they burned Giordano Bruno alive for saying that other worlds were inhabited. I'd love if you could take me there and tell me what happened.
Well, I think that the synchronicity of events that brought me there was actually rather natural, and it wasn't really because I wanted to have, a specific place there in Campo dei Fiori. It just happened that at the time, these two ladies who had this puppet theater that they were conducting every Sunday had this space that was increasingly being expensive for them. I mean, they had problems in maintaining this project. And so my father, who knew them very well, said, okay, maybe my son can take over the place for a period of time and give you something for it. I mean, it was like a coincidence, but at the same time, as I explain in this book, there is very meaningful coincidence, which Carl Gustav Jung used to define as synchronicities. And this was a wonderful synchronicity because the Massetti sisters were themselves two artists, as well as being each of them had their own specialty, but they were two twins who during the war had faced a very difficult situation. Their names are Paola and Lorenza Massetti. Paola died in the year 2022. Lorenza died earlier in 2020. And they were both born in 1927, and they witnessed the brutal murder of their adoptive family, which was the Jewish cousins of scientist Albert Einstein. And this happened at the end of the Second World War. It was, of course, a traumatizing event which shaped their lives, their artistic journey. And I have not really talked about them to any other interviewer that has interviewed me about this book. But yes, they were very welcoming. And I had started living on my own in 1990 in Italy. Most families keep their children on to living with them until they are 30, even 40. But my mother is English. I wanted to be in Rome, and I wanted to live on my own because I was at the time also a successful record producer and a DJ. So I was working. I was capable of maintaining myself. But like I said, it's not easy to find a place right in the center of Rome, and this seemed like a wonderful opportunity. Regarding the Massetti sisters, Lorenza was, the story that they lived with their traumatizing event of their adoptive family being killed was actually portrayed in a semi-autobiographical novel known as Il cielo cade, The Sky is Falling, that came out in 1961 and became immediately a bestseller. Later on in the year 2000, actually, this biography was transformed in a movie, which had as one of their leading actors Isabella Rossellini. So it was definitely a inspiring novel, like I said, autobiography slash, let's say, semi-autobiographical, because there is always, of course, the attempt to add something and to make it more pleasing. But it, like I said, it forged their future. And Lorenza was an Italian filmmaker herself. She was more of a documentarist in reality, and also an artist. And her twin sister Paola was a psychologist and a psychotherapist. And I think that was really her fascination with Jungian psychology got her to know my father, who was regarded as an expert, and he had been also working in Switzerland with Mayer, who was the guy who inherited from Carl Gustav Jung his institute. So for a few years, my father and mother were actually there in Switzerland before relocating to Italy when I was born. So I was born with my father being in the first half of the 1970s a psychiatrist, who had worked, though, like I explained in volume 11 of my Confessions, in France, in Paris, also for MK Ultra. So he was an expert on in the research also of LSD and experimenting LSD, which brought him to collaborate with, of course, what we now know is the infamous MK Ultra, made of a bunch of, it's a project made of a bunch of programs. We only probably know a small part of them, around 150, 160, but in reality there were many also abroad, not only in the United States, though they were always supervised, of course, by the Central Intelligence Agency. In any case, my father then in the middle of the 70s abandoned himself psychiatry. He didn't believe in it anymore after he saw the level of manipulation that they were abusing psychiatry basically, and he wasn't happy about it. So he decided to work in a different way, going out of the academic restrictions and studying the paranormal, doing his own experiments, whereby in the early 70s, when the Sandoz laboratories finished the production officially of the LSD, in Europe at least, there wasn't the possibility of getting this LSD in a legal way for the researchers. So they had to go into the black market, let's say. But apart from that, and also his experimentation led him to go, for a period of time, we lived in India and Sri Lanka. He experimented with hashish to write a book that was based on the using hashish and marijuana, of course, which can, of course, bring to altered states of mind. So he was very much into experimenting, also out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, all kinds of things. Those were parts, of course, of my father's personal work. So with that said, he was connected very much with these Mazzetti sisters who had rented this place and created in a small establishment that was only open on Sunday, which integrated basically Jungian psychology and what is known as Gestalt therapy in these with these puppets that will often be in English, by the way. They will not be in the Italian language. So they were almost like, by doing them in English, it was like encouraging for a number also foreigners who were in Rome to push their kids to maybe go there on a Sunday and see this spectacle. So it was a very small place. It was actually originally, I think it was part of a much larger theater, which is known as the Teatro dei Satiri, which actually, I think still to this day is, I think, operating in the area. I'm not sure because I haven't been in Rome for many years, but yes, for quite a while. But it's actually still, I think, operating in Via di Grotta Pinta 18, which is just around the corner from Campo di Fiori. And then when they wanted to start this project, they kind of separated it with a separate entrance. And it was fascinating to be living in a puppet theater. During the week, I had the possibility of having this place at disposal. And I tell you, it was, like I said, out of this world experience to be living in a puppet theater. But aside from that,
I could only imagine.
yeah, and I mean, it was like, you wake up and you are like with this little thing and, it opens and then you have, at times I will have fun and I will go behind and I will, put on the lights and the stuff and play around with the whole thing. But what happened in this place was definitely another worldly experience, which I didn't expect. I didn't expect that kind of otherworldly experience. Let's say that my intention was to conduct the magic of Abramelin in the Mage, which is a very long ritual, which takes place for 6 to 18 months. So you have to have at disposal quite a bit of time to, to put together this ritual and to conduct it as is described in this grimoire that was first translated from French into English by MacGregor Matters, who was Aleister Crowley's mentor. So he ended up being probably one of the first people who actually experimented with it from the English-speaking world.
That is fascinating. I just did a solo episode where I'm diving into Enochian magic, and I was talking about how Crowley was working with the keys, using the keys, the 19th key to open up the ethers, and him pulling in, going into, I think it was the 10th ether, which was the abyss.
Well, yes. Then you have Coronzon. That is actually the moment.
Exactly it. Yes.
The demon Coronzon. It was actually for me the moment I ended up then a long time after that on the other side of the river, because what happened was that I stayed for a period of time in this puppet theater. But things happen there. Things happen because after that encounter of the third kind, which I described in my book, which of course I leave, most of it is fascinating, and it's definitely something that I encourage people to go and check out. I mean, it's in my latest book, and I left it at the end because I didn't want people to be distracted by it, because of course my book is also an essay on the Vatican, and so I thought, okay, let's leave it there because it actually relates to the Vatican. Giordano Bruno himself was sent to the stake there in Campo dei Fiori. And what happened to me there in connection to what he did, it was a wonderful synchronicity, going back to what I said. However, the Book of Abraham Elling is a secret teaching of sorts, though it's not secret any longer. The book was translated from French, and I think that still one of the main copies is found in one of their main libraries in Paris. So then what happens? It's a book that gives you instructions. You have the main points involved daily prayer, which you have to conduct a couple of times a day. You have this purification aspect. So you have a series of purification practices. You have to have a sort of mental cultivation. You can also try to have a certain diet, which then facilitates contact, because it is said within, let's say, the occult milieu that if you eat, for example, meat, it will then create a lower vibration. In order to maybe establish contact, you have to avoid, for example, eating meat, that. So, I mean, you had this kind of specifics. The text is medieval in origin and was written in German because it's apparently from a rabbi who was who was there, operating there, and people who do this kind of magical working, I don't think had the opportunity of having the same experience, because I think every experience is subjective. Like all magical experiences or all initiatory experiences. However, it is said that this specific grimoire, it's very dangerous. So, if you don't conduct yourself if you don't do the rituals in the proper way, you could actually endanger yourself, because the whole work that is done now, like I said, the fact that I was translated by S.L. MacGregor Matters, who was the main guy responsible for mentoring a young Aleister Crowley, letting him in the Golden Dawn. When he let him in the Golden Dawn, what followed actually was the disgregation of the Golden Dawn, because it created a lot of controversy, if you know a little bit the story. But then, like I said, the book was in the library of the Arsenal, which is one of the main libraries in Paris, and few English or American people were acquainted with it until he did this translation. Today, actually, there is new editions, and there is one that claims to have also a missing element in the grimoire that even Alistair Crowley didn't know about. So, I mean, things have, evolved. We're talking about now a much more sophisticated world where there is the opportunity also for occultists to interact even far away, even if they are distant and even if they don't even know each other personally. At the time, though, it was ascribed to a guy called Abram, a Kabbalist, a scholar of magic who describes his quest also. So it's also not only it's fueled with distractions, but it also has a sort of story which functions almost as an allegory, let's say, that, helps you out. I mean, it's a quest for accomplishing something, but it's rarely put in action because it's way too long, because it's deemed way too dangerous. And so I wanted to do it because at the time I was a bit of a rebel. And like all rebels, I think, they want to do something daring. You want to do something that other people maybe, and that's
to stand
how,
out from everybody else, to be different and to do things differently.
Yeah, I mean, it was the year in which I moved into this place was the place. I mean, after I moved into this place because I needed to have something different that was also detached from the world. And as strange as it might seem, because you are in the center of Rome, in Campo dei Fiori, when you actually go into this little road and then get into this little public theater, it's really an out-of-the-world experience in itself, because you don't feel like you are in the center of Rome. You don't hear all the traffic. The traffic in that area is forbidden. The cars are rarely permitted to go around in that area. So you are,
kind of like in an oasis almost.
Yeah, it's almost honest. Then also there was this interesting element to it that they had made a courtyard. There were two entrances. One was an entrance from the main road, which actually you entered in, and they had beautifully set up this courtyard like some kind of a old Spanish courtyard, architecturally speaking. It didn't even look like you were in Rome. It was like all very pretty with this. And the people living there were artists, most of them at the time, that could still afford maybe to rent a place in the center of Rome. I don't think that's no longer the case. But then there was a side entrance, which is the one that is next to the theater we were discussing, the Teatro dei Satiri. And so there were these two entrances. You could decide to go from one side or the other. And they were actually from, completely different. You had to go all around the building. So it was and what I remember from these experiences that I had, and this is another synchronicity, which I didn't even mention in the book, but it was a rather important one, at least for me at the time, personally speaking. I had a dear friend who suddenly happened to rent the place next to me on the other side of the road. But he was also very respectful. He was actually an African man from Nigeria, the son of an ambassador from Nigeria, who dedicated his life to music. He's no longer with us, unfortunately, died a few years ago. Not so long ago, but this guy was a dear friend. And so to have actually by chance a dear friend just across the courtyard, I could just shout out and say, oh, I need but he wasn't invasive. He knew that no, he wasn't in the sense he knew what I was doing because I told him. So because he was from Nigeria, he had knowledge of magic, of animism, of stuff. I mean, it was kind of like he used to call me the white shaman. I remember his name was Dr. Felix. He was very famous in Italy on the radio, on TV. He has done a record that was popular back in the days and stuff. So he, I remember, was, a good friend to me in that period of time, because at one point I decided I want to isolate myself. I don't want to be disturbed by anybody. I want to dedicate rigorously myself to this ritual. And so, I couldn't have the same kind of social life I had until a few months prior to that, when I was DJing, being a record producer, working on the radio, this and that. It was a completely, I had to make a decision. And 1993 was the year in which I made the decision that I wanted to be really doing something different. And it was actually the year in which I then got also initiated into Freemasonry and the Illuminati. So it kind of coincides with my own personal transformation. I was seeking something. I didn't know exactly what I was seeking, but that something was, of course, at the time, relating to my occult studies, not to any ufological experience or past experience with entities. It was, okay, you can say that if you are in the occult, you know that you would deal sooner or later with non-human intelligence. That's part of the deal. And so that kind of approach is going to sooner or later happen. Okay? But one thing is, the classic evocation or invocation of something. The other thing is to actually suddenly have unexpectedly a blue orb showing up while you were doing an offering ritual of another kind. I mean, it's kind of, that's why in the book I explained, I was in search of my guardian angel, which is a spiritual entity, a deity, that eventually with this book of Abraham Elin the Mage, you are, if you manage to, the whole concept is, if you manage to dominate these demons, you will be able to have this superior contact, let's say. So in the magical tradition, the Holy Guardian Angel, or the Augoides, or the daemon, as the Greeks used to call it, is something that brings you to the search for, like, you are searching and you want to converse with your Holy Guardian Angel, which is a key step for the magical journey towards, your own development in these occult orders. But I was doing it mostly independently. It was the occult orders that were eventually coming to me out of, they suddenly manifested, because in the same period, then I had the AA coming to me during, I remember, it was a DJ gig, which I was doing in this small club that belonged to these people from the Banda della Maiana. They were connected with, it was basically La Banda della Maiana was connected to the P2 and stuff. And I was in this club, and suddenly this guy comes, and I remember the DJ booth was slightly up here, and he, does like this. It takes my attention and says, after, when you have time, come and talk to me down here. And I went and talked to him, and the guy hands me a piece of paper, and he was a member of the Ordo Templi Orientis of Aleister Crowley, and of course of the AA, which is also known at times as the As Argentinum. But the interesting, elements that I bring out in this experience here is an element of contact, which then later on is confirmed by the events. And that is the interesting, the interesting thing, because you can have an encounter with something, You can maybe even think that person is meaningful for you, but it doesn't necessarily have to be meaningful for everybody. And plus, it doesn't necessarily give you something specific. In the case of my own encounter, there was definitely something specific about it. And so that something specific was the connection with Sirius also, because, at the time while I was doing the Magic of Abramelin, I was also studying Aleister Crowley, and every book of Aleister Crowley opens up with this symbol of the AA. I don't know if you ever saw this symbol, which is
I have
at
not.
the beginning of every publication of Aleister Crowley. It's basically a magical organization that he established with George Cecil Jones in 1907, a little bit to replace his own work with the Golden Dawn that was kind of fading out due to the controversy. So he wanted to create something similar to the Golden Dawn, but different, because, like I explained in my prior book, Invisible Master, Aleister Crowley was practicing the magic of Abramelin to bypass the terrestrial organizations and eventual masters, including MacGregor Matters himself, so he could achieve contact with these secret chiefs or invisible masters that are not necessarily humans. And he did that, and then that brought him to Egypt, to his wife going in a state of trance, to him downloading, basically, like they say these days, what became the Book of the Law, and then, of course, himself proclaiming, the new era of do what thou wilt, telema, this new era that of Horus that will have replaced the past religions like Christianity with this new thing that he had somehow channeled. Now, regardless of all that, the concept was to achieve contact with a non-human intelligence. And that happened not only through the magic of Abramelin the Mage, but MacGregor Mathers and him had also translated another grimoire, which he recited then one night inside the Great Pyramid, which triggered even further the reaction of the gods. In my case, I was there, often watching with fascination to the symbol of the AA, which is a symbol which has, to me, before being initiated in it, it was like, well, I don't know. I mean, it was weird because it is, of course, a seal, a sigillum, how you can define it. The seal of the AA is, it's a seal that represents this tradition. But at the time, I didn't know that it actually also represented a link to Sirius.
Oh, okay.
It represented a link to Sirius, as well as representing a link to ancient Egypt. Of course, we know that Crowley was fascinated, but it is the AA system is really important because it's something that even the initiates don't consider a the traditional order where you meet, the grandmaster and the brothers around, and you go into an initiation and then you get the degrees. No, it's a little bit like the more traditional Rosicrucians used to be, or the Martinist at times, where you only meet your direct superior once you are ready to move further. You don't have, the social aspect. It's a very much a group, a work that you do singularly. So that's why the AA is connected also with the invocation of knowledge and conversation with the holy guardian angel concept. And to me, what appeared initially with this orb, I initially interpreted it almost like something of a religious nature. When I saw it, I said, "What is this? An angel?" It's blue, this light surrounded by this blue. It kind of like, I was like, "What is this? Something? I mean, what am I witnessing here? Something, And then, though, when the channeling, meaning the downloading that followed this encounter happened, then I understood that it was more of a military discipline and scientifical transmission. It wasn't like, bless you, my child, welcome here. It wasn't like that. It was a much more direct and disciplined way of transmitting the truth through this methodic transmission that then I relayed in these 44 pages, which at the time I didn't really know what they were all about. But soon after, as I described through another synchronicity, which of course readers can discover by reading it in the book. What happened to me after, it was even more fascinating, because it was like one synchronicity after the other followed, and I was like, confirming the nature of it all was the fact that, like I state in the book, one afternoon I came in through I was just going out to buy, I used to go and buy a loaf of bread and water, because you have to really live like a monk to do this ritual. So you have to it's not like you can wine and dine and it's like you are literally like a monk. And so you have to have that discipline of a monk. I remember putting on the TV and suddenly finding myself with a subject which had been prior to that downloaded by me, and regarding a tribe in Africa called the Dogon, which I knew nothing about.
Oh, they're interesting.
And everything was confirming, what I had downloaded, and I was just like, whoa. And it was really fascinating that for me to see that there was this often reoccurring synchronicities that happened. Now, the level of, the AA element was very important to me, because later I entered the AA and I went through the degrees of the AA, and it was an experience which, of course, is part of my initiatory experience, but all the experiences which I had in the years following this encounter of the third kind somehow were linked to that encounter. So, right, that's it. I mean, I told you more than I told other people. I think that most of our viewers will now wonder what, will wonder what I'm talking about here.
They want to read more about it and know more about it. Now, let's dive into the heart of this book. Okay. What is the message that you were getting out with this book, and where do we start from that?
Okay, first of all, it's quite interesting, because we are kind of starting from the end of the book, going backwards.
We are, yes.
Which is a very interesting way of doing this interview.
From the end to I agree.
Yeah. I guess that right at the end, I include the interview with Roberto Pinotti, who has been my mentor in this field after. So Pinotti is a Freemason himself, is somebody which I shared a long time collaboration with, organizing a series of conferences in Italy, especially the ones that I conducted in a castle, the Castle of Roviano. And then later on, I also had him in this political organization, which then participated in the 2013 political elections in Italy in favor of Silvio Berlusconi, who had been attacked by the Bilderberg Club. So we wanted somehow to help out Berlusconi at the time, though it didn't really work out because when the Bilderberg Club is way too powerful for any Italians opposing a technocratic system that Europe and the CIA has created together with the Jesuits. It's impossible, but we tried. So, and we tried to bring.
At least they're trying. At least they're doing something. Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, at the end, I had to flee Italy, because I tried probably too much. And so in the end, I created, unfortunately, also when you are dealing with politics in Italy, when you are exposing Freemasonry and the mafia and the Vatican, in the end, they're going to stop you. And they're either going to stop you with a bullet or either they're going to stop you by ruining you. I didn't want either one or the other. And eventually, as you know, I came here to America and now I'm no longer Italian. I'm an American citizen. So it actually took some courage for me because at 49, having to flee a country with no certainties, moving here in the United States of America, it wasn't an easy thing. But me and my wife have courageously put together also this publishing house company called Cursum Perficio with a lot of books. We have managed to actually also start a successful show on YouTube, and we carry on doing this with a lot of pleasure. But we are most of all happy of being free because, a lot of people here talk about freedom. A lot of people talk about being persecuted, but I'm talking about the police breaking down the door, police pointing the lights at your face to your wife and stuff, being arrested, thrown, into isolation, or things that are not nice. And that a journalist or a writer who is simply trying to tell a story or tell other stories shouldn't be, having this kind of problems. So I think that the purpose of this book mainly is to follow up on exposing more about the Vatican and what drives the Vatican currently. As we all know, is the great change that happened in the Second Vatican Council in the first half of the 1960s. I concluded my Illuminati series last year with volume 12 of my Confessions. But after that, I started a new series of essays which will deal with certain topics which maybe need more. And another 450 pages. This is, with this book, it means that I had a lot more to say about specifically the Vatican top secret alien agenda, which is being carried on behind the scenes since the 1930s, since there was an actual UFO crash in Italy, the direct involvement of the Vatican, which then was carried on this side of the world by the Vatican representatives who got involved in the various crash retrieval,
like Roswell,
the
right?
various, like Roswell and possibly also others, because Roswell is not the only one. But the Vatican was
Sorry
there.
to interrupt you, Leo. You talked about an initial crash back in the 1930s. Is that magenta? Yeah. Is that what you're
yes,
talking about?
That's commonly referred to as the magenta crash. In reality, it is a crash that happened between the towns of Magenta and Vergiate in the north of Italy, close to Milan. It happened in 1933. Soon after the crash, Mussolini established what was known as Cabinet RS 33. And this cabinet was directed by a known scientist of the time, the guy who invented the radio, basically, Guglielmo Marconi.
Oh, really?
And
Marconi was involved with that. Okay.
He was the head.
Okay.
He was actually, this was later confirmed also by his own family, because, I mean, when we are discussing here these topics in the book, I don't speculate. I actually bring documents. I bring documents that are confirmed by forensic analysts. These official documents were actually given to us originally by the grandson of Benito Mussolini, whose father was killed by the father-in-law, so by his grandfather, which was Galeazzo Ciano. The son of Galeazzo Ciano provided us these documents. Initially, he provided these documents to the CUN, the Centro Ufologico Nazionale, starting at the end from the last part of the 1990s. Eventually, they manifested in a book that was published by Roberto Pinotti and Alfredo Lissoni, because it wasn't only about the 1933 UFO crash, which, of course, it's referenced in specific documents. One of them in particular I published here in my book, which is this one. But aside from the Magenta crash, then you had the whole a series of fascist X-Files, let's say, that because after the crash, then we had a bunch of UFO sightings that followed that. So I also deal with that in the book. I explained, though, the role of the Vatican, especially in regards to Guglielmo Marconi, because Guglielmo Marconi, before dying, was pushed by the Pope Pius XI in not giving any of the reverse engineering results to Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. So there was actually sort of like I said, there was a beginning of the reverse engineering, because in 1933 the first thing that Mussolini created was actually a group that will analyze and reverse engineer this whole thing. I mean, the group was called RS 33, Ricerche Speciali. That was like special research. But if you actually think about it, RS-33 is also, and this was pointed out to me by Roberto Pinotti, who found out this after receiving the documents. It was also a specific section in the archives in Milan that the fascists dedicated to reverse engineering. So it was specifically dedicated to reverse engineering. It wasn't like, today there is a lot of talk about the legacy program, about the reverse engineering that was being conducted here in the United States. But let's not forget that the reverse engineering program here in the United States inherited the reverse engineering program of fascists and Nazis that permitted even, if it wasn't for von Braun, NASA would have not even been able to allegedly send their first man on the moon. So here we are talking about, the very basis of a technology that could have definitely changed the course of the war. And for that reason, the Pope himself intervened. And intervened contacting Guglielmo Marconi, who used to be the president of the Regia Accademia d'Italia. What does that mean? At the time, Marconi was the president of the Royal Academy of Italy. Italy was a kingdom until 1946. Let's not forget that. It was actually the OSS who tricked the Italians into transforming it into a republic on June 2nd, 1946, which is something that I always find a little bit I find it not good for the Italians, simply because we went from a monarchy into a republic of crooks, mafiosi, and thieves. And that's courteously of, unfortunately, the United States of America, because we could still have a republic, monarchy instead of a republic. And I think that at the end of the day, yes, the monarchy has a lot of problems, but at least when you have a royal house that doesn't behave, you simply substitute it with another. It happened in other places like, United Kingdom, in England. They took away one, they had one royal house, and they went and had another one. Now we have the Windsors, It used to be the Hanoverians, And before that, though, we had other royal houses that the Stuarts, we had other royal houses that followed. However, that's a matter, like I said, it's a choice that was forced upon the Italians, and it was done in an illegal way because Italians, more than 50% of the population, didn't try to read. So it was pretty easy for them to go around during the poll and say, just put X here for the monarchy. And instead there was the Republic. That was a great injustice, I think. But in any case, at the time, the Cabinet RS-33 was given after we have the event that happened in the region of Lombardy, which is north of Italy, and it happened in June of 1933. It happened in June 1933, so we are talking about 14 years before Roswell, New Mexico. And it was David Grush talked about it for the first time here in the English-speaking world, and everybody was like, wow, in 2023, Mussolini, a UFO, the Pope back-channeled the UFO. Everybody was surprised by it. But people like me were not surprised because this research had been already presented officially in the year 2000 during the World Symposium that takes place on UFOs in San Marino. The Republic of San Marino is a small republic, as a small enclave. It's an independent republic from Italy, but it's still within Italy, a little bit like the Vatican. And Roberto Pinotti organizes an event every year there. He actually resides in San Marino. So in the year 2000, it was presented in this event, which started in 1993, and it's been created by the Centro Ufologico Nazionale, which, like I stated, collaborated with my book. The Centro Ufologico Nazionale was also invited in 2010 to do their first conference with the chiefs within the Vatican. So, I mean, they are pretty, let's say, not only serious, but rather close to the institutions kind of organization, okay? And I needed that kind. I know that it's not always easy because you will always face gatekeepers. You will always face people who have, another mission, which is to control the disclosure. We want disclosure to be open to everybody, but these people are like really wanting to carefully give you one drop at the time because they're afraid everybody will go in a state of panic.
Nuts or something like that. Yeah.
So when I decided to write this book, I said to Roberto, listen, you know my style. I'm not somebody who's gonna be silent about certain things or I am somebody who is very much open for real disclosure, let's say, regardless of the consequences. But most of all, my interest was to understand the role of the Vatican in all this, because I really wanted to explain then,
like why they're doing
why
this.
the Vatican, why they're doing this. And so, going back to what we said, Mussolini nominated Guglielmo Marconi, who was at the time also senator, by the way, of the Kingdom of Italy, aside from being the president of the Regia Accademia. But then the Pope knew that Guglielmo Marconi will probably listen to him more than to Mussolini because Guglielmo Marconi was a practicing and very devout Catholic. So the Pope intervened directly, saying, if you have anything that you have reverse engineered from this UFO or any invention that you, please don't give it to Benito Mussolini or to the Nazis. So he was very clear, apparently. And at the time, the secretary of Pope Pius XII was the future Pope Pius XI. So that is why Pope Pius XI, the successor, Pope Pius XII, was the secretary of Pope Pius XI. It's always a little bit confusing. Pope Pius XI was He died in 1939, so just at the beginning of the Second World War, and he was his name was Ambrogio Damiano Achille Ratti. He was a typical Italian, who had been brought up very much in a situation in which he needed to have, if not the support, at least the tolerance of Nazi Germany, because Nazi Germany was very powerful. So the Pope was pushed to what was known as the Reich Concordat. The Reich Concordat is this treaty that the Vatican and the merged Nazi Germany signed basically in 1933. So they signed it a month after the UFO crash, which is interesting if you think about it.
Very
In
interesting.
in this story, it's kind of interesting. The secretary, like we said, will be the future Pope Pius XII, which was Eugenio Pacelli. And that's the problem here. When you have, for example, David Grush that says he back-channeled, that's true. Pope Pius XII back-channeled the UFO. So the UFO from Montserrat ended up being brought here to the United States. But the problem is that now there is a lot of journalists who, after David Grush has said these things, think that they might find some official document that proves it. That is a problem because, you see, the communication was made directly between the old Pope and his secretary on a matter of a need-to-know basis that was very direct. So how are you going to find apart from the fact, if the document exists, it will exist in the Vatican archives, and good luck to have access to those archives.
That is locked down.
It's a bit difficult. But on top of that, there is the problem of the need of the direct communication between the past Pope and the new Pope that then was elected in 1939, because the Pope Pius XII became the guy who really saved the day, both as secretary and both as Pope, for two reasons. If Marconi would have given before his death this weapon known as the Raggio della Morte, the death ray. The death ray is almost legendary. People think, maybe this is not true, that Marconi created something like that, because most of his life he was interested in communication. He wasn't interested in creating something called the death ray, But
that's fascinating you bring that up, because Tesla was also known to have created the death ray, and Marconi and Tesla had a bit of a relationship because Tesla allowed Marconi to reuse his patents. So I wonder if there is them working together on something like that.
Apparently, Roberto Pinotti, in the interview that I made at the end of the book, confirms that that's the case, that there was some kind of relation there also with Tesla technology. So he confirms that what you're saying. However, what happened was that at one point, there actually was an experiment that took place. It took place, there was this this powerful ray that will halt planes, motors in air, fleets at sea. It was called by some the death ray, by others the paralyzing ray. There was, you can find articles even in the Indianapolis Times, which is quite interesting. I have a copy, of course not original, but a photocopy of the Indianapolis Times of August 28, 1935, that talks about this paralyzing ray perfected by Italy's Marconi. So it was known that he conducted these experiments with this. And it was the experiment apparently was conducted between Roma and Ostia. Now, for those who don't know Rome, let me explain a little bit where this experiment took place. Ostia is basically the seaside part, is the part, let's say, is in itself now an independent town, but in reality it's an appendix of Rome. No, it's basically where Rome faces the sea. There is the beach. Ostia is the point of entrance for in ancient times, the people will go to the Lido of Ostia, and then they will enter the Tiber, and then through the Tiber they will get into Rome. So Ostia is part of Rome, though Romans consider it a fraction, an independent fraction in a way. It is part of the Commune of Rome, and the experiment took place in this, between Rome and Ostia. There is a road, which is a very long road. You have all these pines on the side, and I remember this road very well because when I was a young kid, I used to often go to the sea and then come back to Rome. Even in the middle of the night, we had parties there and stuff. So it's easy. So what happened was this, that Mussolini the Mussolini basically stated himself. I mean, this is like actually stuff that is found in the official diaries of Mussolini. So it's confirmed. It's not like some kind of speculation, that this death ray, was just a legend. Apparently, in a document, and in more than one document, apparently, there's a journalist, Ivano Fossani, who found also other elements. But let's say that there were definitely a lot of testimonies of what happened on this road between Ostia and Rome. There's a fraction called Acilia. And at that point, during the experiment, every single car stopped. Every train stopped. And fortunately, there were no planes, because nowadays, actually, there is close to Fiumicino airport, so it will have probably stopped the whole airport. But that was the experiment. The experiment was conducted, and Mussolini talks about it. And talks about, Mussolini said that, in his own words, cars, motorcycles, trucks suddenly stopped. And they stopped for like 20 minutes. And then it was repeated, the experiment, on a different road, same thing. So there was actually an experiment that was conducted, and also apparently, imagine the sophistication back then, they even brought up in the sky a couple of, there wasn't any drones back then.
Like hot air balloons or something like that, or blimps?
No. They were mechanic. They were actually like small planes, but without the pilot. Okay. They were actually controlled by the land, so they could see what will happen to a potential airplane in the sky.
Okay. Oh, okay. And I understand what you're saying.
So it was like, like when we were kids and we had those little planes that you used to fly around, maybe. Okay. Two of those also froze and went down. Actually, apparently, they went in flames, so even worse.
Wow. Yeah.
And this happened at 2,000 meters of altitude, so at rather a high altitude. So the result convinced the Vatican that if this weapon was to stay in the hands of Mussolini, it was given by Marconi to Mussolini, and then, of course, to Hitler, because Hitler was already interested in what happened in 1933 and the subsequent reverse engineering operations. Anerbe had been founded, I think, in 1935. Himmler was very interested. So imagine what will have happened, especially with the growing interest of the Hanerbe in this, that then manifested fully in 1941 when they started to really, apparently, they were actively involved in wanting to bring the whole UFO to Germany, but it never happened. They stayed in Montesorat. So there was this experiment. Then Marconi died. Let's say that at the beginning, I think, because the Pope initially wasn't informed of this whole reverse engineering thing. He was obviously informed of what happened with the UFO, that they crashed, because you can't hide anything to the Pope, but he didn't know what Mussolini was trying to do with the reverse engineering, especially because Mussolini was a kind of guy who will use that kind of thing to make himself feel great in front of Adolf Hitler. You see what I have here? I have a UFO and I'm doing this and I'm going to reverse engineer this technology and we will become unbeatable and the Allies will be defeated. Yeah, that kind of thing, So the Marconi was advised by the Pope, and the Pope said to him in a personal audience that he should never give any of this reverse engineering or the death ray itself, which we still don't understand clearly if it's the result of the reverse engineering or maybe, like you said, also connected with Tesla technology.
It's very difficult to know if it's one or the other, if it is reverse engineered or if it was a creation or an inspiration of something that they reverse engineered.
Absolutely. There was, though, an interesting element to the story, because a journalist, Claretta Petacci was Mussolini was a womanizer who had one woman a day kind of thing, but he had also his lovers, and amongst his lovers, apart from the wife, the main lover was known as Claretta Petacci. Now, Claretta Petacci apparently gave a testimony of her being on the road at the end of June 1936, on the road between Rome and Ostia, and she herself said that her car stopped. The Mussolini didn't tell her anything until the evening. So what happened was this. The experiment was conducted at the end of June 1936 on the Roma-Ostia, as we said. So on the road that goes from Rome, the Eur, now what is known as the Eur district, and goes down to Ostia. And then later on, apparently, she heard about this whole thing. And she had done the wrong thing, but first of all, she experienced herself the experiment by having the car that kind of froze
on her, yes,
on the way. Yes, and apparently, also the wife of, for some reason, also the wife of Mussolini, Donna Rachele, had the same experience with the car that also stopped. So he had both the experience that was then relayed to the journalist by then the lover, and then as well as the testimony of the wife on this occurrence. So it's not like the ray of death is a legend. Myself, when I was a young kid and I was often going on that road, I heard this story many times from various people, and I was always a little bit doubtful, oh, the death ray, yeah, and everybody, no, but it's a real thing, Leo, it really happened here, And then after, when I had the confirmation from very serious people like Roberto Pinotti and other researchers that this was a real thing, I was like, wow. It was I was quite impressed by the whole thing, because if you think about it, this could have been the invention that could have changed the whole course of the war. That's
You're
it.
Right. You're
With
right.
this invention, there will never have been, Normandy. There will never have been anything, because they will have pushed a button and everything will have frozen.
Yes.
So it's quite incredible. Aside from that, though, another interesting element of Guglielmo Marconi is that he was always interested in UFOs and aliens. He was always interested. It's not like his interest just one day from the other
Just came
after the
from something
Magenta
and then
crash.
nothing. Yes.
No, it's not like the Magenta crash made him a believer. He was already a believer.
Okay, I understand.
Because, in fact, at the beginning of the 1900s, he actually promoted the idea of communicating with Mars and to actually silence every radio communication. On one day, the whole radio communication system of the Earth were silenced so that they could listen if there were communications from Mars. So there was actually a growing fixation that then kind of, it's another case, if you want, of synchronicity. The guy was already fixated with the whole thing, and then suddenly he has a UFO at disposal. Sadly, he died 4 years later, so he couldn't really, get deep into it. A lot of his colleagues ended up instead in the Manhattan Project. So that is something different, because then you see there is actually a kind of thread line here, no?
Yeah.
Between
there's a connection.
thread,
Yeah.
a connection between, because then you have the Manhattan Project, which has a lot of, Manhattan Project, especially the Italians were like Enrico Fermi, were indispensable for the development of it.
Yes.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Let's not forget that, we are talking about, there were fears that, of course, there would be a German atomic bomb project. We all know what happened later on. But think about it. One of the main people involved with this whole thing was Edward Teller. And I talk about Edward Teller in my book, because Edward Teller was then somebody connected with recently. We even had the recent, these UFO batches that keep on being released, the soft disclosure by the government that confirms that Edward Teller, who was this theoretical physicist and chemical engineer who is known as the father of the hydrogen bomb, was quite intrigued by the UFOs. But there is also an important element. The fact is that, he was born in Austria and Hungary, but Teller was known to many as the Martians. The Martians, people think the Martians are the Martians from Mars. While instead, the Martians are a group of prominent scientists, mainly of Sabbatean Frankist Hungarian descent, who emigrated from Europe to the United States in the 20th century. And amongst them, there was also Teller, but it was like a suggestion that was almost a joke that Hungary was a front for aliens from Mars. I know it's not a little bit crazy, but it is actually, there is some incredible connections here. If you think about it, because then at one point there was apparently an Hungarian Roswell that happened in 1996, and people talk about all the time. I don't know if that's the real thing. But going back to the Vatican was knowledgeable about this whole engagement with the non-human affairs from the very start. And so that then built their own fascination, interest, and then ultimately from the 1950s onwards, also a new theological opening that could make the Catholic religion less closed and more prepared for eventual full disclosure by preparing the setup for an upcoming one world religion. Now, that couldn't be done in a day, because before what I described was the actual encounter of the third kind, a direct encounter between a pope and an alien being that happened in July 1961. with a pope who then gave birth to the Second Vatican Council. It was the guy who actually had already announced the Second Vatican Council. So before the beginning of the council, he apparently had a visit from an extraterrestrial in the Castel Gandolfo Gardens, and that is an incredible event that was then witnessed by his, apparently, allegedly witnessed by his secretary, Monsignor Capovilla. Then later on, there was a lot of talk about the whole thing. Eventually, the testimony of this whole event ended up in the hands of a Freemason called Pierre Carpi, and Pierre Carpi then related it in a book that shows also that the Pope Roncalli, who had been a Freemason and a Rosicrucian, had himself engaged with these entities even before becoming Pope. So he had contacted them in a lodge during a session of the Rosicrucian degree. So there is definitely a lot of interesting material in this book that I urge you to study because I think it's kind of fascinating.
I think so.
And it's also important to understand that I always talk for many years about a Vatican-led New World Order, and this is probably one of the main reasons for them to lead this New World Order.
It's one of the pillars for this transition. I know we're getting to the end here, Leo, but I would love to have you back on to talk further about this, to get into the Jesuits and the Vatican, and why is the Vatican, looking up to the skies with telescopes. And I think they also have a certain telescope that they call Lucifer as well. And it's something that is...
Well, actually, I explain there is a consortium of universities led by the Heidelberg University, which then kind of joined the Vatican. After the Vatican established their first observatory, they created another observatory. However, the project was always with the blessings of the Jesuits until, of course, the name Lucifer was spotted by some people on the internet, and all the heat forced the Jesuits to take eventually all the links away from their official website, and also officially declaring that they had nothing to do with it, it was something to do with the consortium. Then the heat continued to build up, and then in the end, even the consortium changed the name and called it Lucy. And then Lucy was joined by Lucy 2, and both of these Lucys are in my book, and I talk about them, and you can actually even see them because, like I said, Lucifer nowadays, Lucifer, of course, was an acronym, is now instead known as Lucy, and this is the actual two Lucys at work, which are these infrared
because it's like a binocular, right? It's more of like a binocular than it is a telescope, correct?
It's an infrared camera that you place on the large binocular telescope. It's not in itself a telescope, but it's something you place on top, infrared, because then with the infrared, the interesting element is, what do you see with the infrared? Well, you see a lot of UFOs. In fact, what happened was that when Tom Horn, the late Tom Horn, and Chris Putham, who wrote Exo Vaticana, went up there, Mount Graham, they were able to record by just keeping the camera on in their bag while they were inside without telling them anything. One of the Jesuits admitted in front of them that the skies were filled by UFOs, and often they had to interrupt their own, observations because of them. So, I mean, it was like a real occurrence. It wasn't a joke. Let's not forget that Mount Graham becomes then the new key observatory, but it relays all the information to the headquarters, which is in Castel Gandolfo, which happens to be also the summer residence of the Pope, which, like I explain in my book, the new Pope, Pope Leo XIV, is now rebuilding, is actually restructuring. He started the work in May of this year, and he is spending more and more time there than actually in the Vatican, which is rather incredible. So this is it's rather interesting how we have, and I tell you, not because I'm half Italian or but there is a link that is constant between Vatican and Italy, of course, and the scientists that work with the Vatican. And I mean, it's obvious that the Vatican is in Italy, basically. So obviously it's part of the, no? But I would say that after Enrico Fermi fled Mussolini's fascist regime, the interesting thing about Enrico Fermi was that we know him because he created the Fermi paradox. And the Fermi paradox becomes that moment in which, apparently during a meal, Fermi says, well, if we have all these aliens, where are they? Kind of thing.
Yes.
Where are these extraterrestrials? But at the same time, think about it. The Fermi paradox, which apparently shows the inconsistencies between the lack of conclusive evidence of extraterrestrial and the high likelihood of their existence, was stated by somebody who must have known about alien reverse engineering. So he was either not informed by the people like Edward Tweller or his colleagues like Konopinski or Herbert York, but it kind of like it seems obvious that
I think it sounds like a misdirection almost. It's almost a misdirection is what he's trying to do.
Because, what happens in Los Alamos then attracts the UFOs. And then later on, when these UFOs are reverse engineered, they lead the governments to want to know more about them and having more of these UFOs to reverse engineer because the aliens don't want to give this technology. That is another specific which came through the Russian remote viewers that were very clearly indicating the aliens didn't want to give any of the technology for military use. So then they built the whole remote viewing things to lure them up and then bring them down and then reverse engineer. So it's a big mess that can't really be completely revealed. But definitely the whole thing of, there have been many attempts to resolve the Fermi paradox, such as suggesting that the extraterrestrials are extremely rare, that the lifetime of such civilizations is short, that they could never really come in contact with us in any case. There is even the Jesuits recently, like Guy Consolmagno, like to go on interviews and basically backtrack on what they had previously stated, because they are now seeming, like I explained, in the new age of Pope Leo XIV, is almost like everything is on hold before the final disclosure. And nobody's allowed to discuss it or speculate about it. But then, like I explained in my latest article that you can check on leozagami.com together with the links to my latest book, I strongly suggest you read my latest article that I published today, because I explain how there is some inconsistencies even amongst the Jesuits who are directing the observatory currently, because we have Father Di Soso, the new director, who is there saying we need, we are ready, our theology is ready, we kind of like, he's even ready to baptize an alien. But then we have the guy himself who wrote the book, Baptize an Alien, who is saying, oh, well, I'm disappointed by this whole thing. I think it's not worth studying if there is any UFOs. Going back on things that he stated previously, that really makes us also understand the Machiavellian nature of the Jesuits, of putting two different realities in front of us so we cannot really understand what is their position. However, from decades of having studied the Vatican, we finally know their top secret alien agenda is about controlling the UFO narrative and shaping up the one-world religion that they eventually want to present with the aliens as the saviors of mankind. That is it.
I think that's a great way to end this for tonight. Is set up, prop up this one world government with the aliens as the saviors, It almost sounds like hints of from Revelation, you know, and it's kind of like the coming of the Antichrist, almost in a way. Definitely has sounds of that. So
we can discuss it in the future, of course.
I agree.
But this is definitely a great way of ending it.
Yeah, I've talked with a couple of previous guests, and this is something that it just keeps coming up. So it's fascinating. And Leo, I want to say thank you so much for spending the time here. Where can everybody find your books, and what is your website again, one last time, where they can also find your blog?
Here on the screen, leozagami.com, of course, as well as my books. You can purchase this book on the paperback, in the paperback format. There's also in the hardcover format and on Kindle. I always suggest people to get a paper format, regardless of its hardcover or paper, but because I don't trust the digital world, especially in the future, especially with what is happening in the next few years. But having said that, this book will open your eyes to the Vatican involvement in the most important, relevant topic of our time.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Leo.
God bless you all.
You as well. Thank you. All right, everyone. Leo Zagami, and very interesting on his topic and what he talks about here. His book, I think it's so relevant right now that we all need to pay attention to everything that is being given to us. You know, Dr. Joseph Bergeron, we just talked to about with the Mark of the Beast, you know, the DNA editing. They're talking about bringing in these so-called gods that will be able to do things. And who is that going to be? Well, it definitely looks like the Vatican is going to bring in the aliens. Cue the aliens? Is that what we're going to do now? All right, everyone. So if you did enjoy this, make sure you guys hit that like and subscribe. If you're watching, you know, hit the bell for notifications. If you are listening on Spotify or on Apple, love it if you guys can give me a 5-star review. That really helps the show, really helps me promote everything. And until the next time, everyone, keep your curiosity wandering, keep the light lit, and always find your way home.
Beneath the stars where shadows grow, the Nephilim's echoes whisper low. Bigfoot roams through the forest deep, and Dogman prowls where the brave won't sleep. Across lost history we wonder why, seeking the truth that time tried to hide. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. UFOs streak through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the code gas flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Through the velvet skies, aliens watch with unblinking eyes. The paranormal hums where silence breaks, in the void of secrets a lantern wakes. Through hidden realms and stories untold, the code gas flame is a light to hold. Keep your curiosities wandering and the light lit, through the darkness don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come, and always find your way back home. Legends rise from the earth's deep core, a lost legacy we can't ignore. With every step, the veil grows thin, revealing worlds where the strength begins. Keep your curiosity wandering in the light lit. Through the darkness, don't ever quit. In the codex, the mysteries come and always find your way back. Sometimes cryptids that come